Hi guys, Brand here, and welcome to another commentary video. Today, I want to talk about my feelings about DS being changed or rebuffed back to 5 seconds, because it's not my favorite, and I'm sure you can already tell that based on my feelings, but it's probably not for the reasons that you think. I kind of want to break down multiple things with this and talk about it with you. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. DS, functionally, as a perk, exists solely to prevent tunneling. That is what it does. That is why that perk exists. It's to prevent tunneling from happening. That is its functionality. That is its whole purpose for existing. That's what it was before the 6.10 update when it initially got nerfed, and that's what it was after to a very, very weak extent. As so many other content creators have pointed out, and very, very accurately, is DS is very, very still commonly brought in games. It is still a top 10 use survivor perk in the game, so obviously it did not fall out of use entirely. It is still something that is brought by the community a lot, and usually it's brought more by experienced players and not so much intermediate and weak players that don't really know how to get the most out of it and have not been dunked on by a spirit or a blight that just immediately catches right up and makes them feel bad, so they stop running the perk. But there lies, I believe, the biggest problem with DS just as a concept, is that killers don't have to run a perk to tunnel. Regardless of how you feel about tunneling, good or bad, it is a strategy in the game that killers use extremely frequently. And killers don't have to run a specific perk to have access to tunneling. Tunneling is just a strategy that they can just suddenly employ at any given point in the match. This is something that I actually recommend to people in the match reviews, that if you are at 2 gens and nobody's dead, you need to start tunneling. You need to suddenly, if you have not been tunneling up until that point, you need to flip the switch and suddenly start tunneling. That way you can create a 3v1 situation as quick as possible. That way you can set yourself up for a win. The point being is that killers can do this quite literally any time. They have no restrictions, no perk or add-on restrictions that gatekeep them from being able to tunnel a survivor whenever they want. But in the survivor end of the game, you have no consistent access to anti-tunnel whatsoever unless you are running specific perks that allow you to do so, or specific add-ons in the case of like Styptic or Syringe and stuff like that, or just map RNG of having a good map with a lot of resources that you actually have the capability to loop after a killer decides to come back to hook and tunnel you. Essentially, anti-tunnel is only something on Survivor that you have access to if you brought the right perks, and even the right perks that you bring aren't too strong, at least until DS comes through with its new update. Or you have the map RNG, which obviously by the name RNG is not going to be consistent. Survivors have no consistent way to prevent tunneling unless they specifically plan for it before the match or just happen to have very, very good luck. In a perfect world, I'm going to say this, in a perfect world, DS should be weak. We should have it be like a 2-second stun and have its timer be even weaker. Why? Because it should ideally probably be something as a base kit ability that survivors can do. Because it is disproportionate that killers always have access to tunneling, but survivors don't always have access to anti-tunneling. There's something disproportionate happening there. So if DS was actually extremely weak, but it was base kit for everybody, it would buy a little bit of time for somebody who just wants to surprise you with a comp game at 5 gens and tunnel you out of 5 gens, that at least you can buy a little bit of time for your team, because you would have the answer to it without specifically running off the record, Dead Hard, DS, and stuff like that, just to prevent yourself from being tunneled out, which does not happen every game. There's always been a problem with the game in terms of distinguishing between somebody who is tunneling because they have to versus somebody who's tunneling because the survivors are making egregious mistakes, or somebody who is tunneling just because they're trying to get their pressure back. Obviously, hitting a 5-second stun from a DS when you need somebody dead by 2 gens is not a bad thing. You're just trying to win the game. You're just trying to play normally as killer. Whereas, like, if you get DS'd at like 5 gens because you're trying to, you know, instigate a surprise comp game, yeah, you kind of deserve that 5-second DS. And there's no way to really distinguish between the guy who's trying to use tunneling as like a fair catch-up tool versus the guy who just likes tunneling people out of the game because they like easy games. There's no way to distinguish between these two people, and that's kind of like always been the problem with like having something like DS be strong or weak. It's because the tunneling problem, there is no current solution that distinguishes between somebody using tunneling as a catch-up tool, which is more fair and makes more sense, versus somebody who's just trying to, you know, take advantage of a lack of comms or a lack of prepared build or a lack of good map RNG just to get somebody out of the game super quickly. And that's where a lot of issues with the whole DS thing lies, is now, if you are going to be one of those people who is trying to tunnel for just to get somebody out of the game because, you know, the game's almost over and you need to, you know, scramble for a 3v1, then that person's going to be punished a lot. So that's always been one of the biggest issues with anti-tunnel in the game, is how do we apply anti-tunnel in a way that doesn't punish the entire strategy of tunneling, but only punishes people who are doing it in a way that is unhealthy for the game. Furthermore, it's worth mentioning that Decisive Strike is a paid perk. It is a paid perk. Like I brought up in the other video, when Boon Circuit of Healing was just dominating the meta and making killers miserable, Behavior released Shattered Hope, which is now a useless perk, but they released Shattered Hope, which was a general perk that was available to everyone. DS is locked behind a paywall, and I would argue not a very good one. And that's coming from, like, I literally have the Halloween Tapestry back there. That's my favorite horror movie. Alien is my favorite horror franchise, but singular movie, Halloween. I love Halloween so much. Halloween Chapter is not really worth buying these days. Save is okay. It definitely got nerfed a fair bit. It's like a B tier perk now. But Play With Your Food, very niche. Dying Light's not good. Lori, if you only want to get Lori. Soul Survivor, not good. Object of Obsession is not as good as it used to be. Obviously gets you in a lot of trouble as much as it helps you. And it's just not worth it. Like, it's just not worth buying the character just for one anti-tunnel perk. And that's just foregoing the fact that, like, why do I have to buy a specific character to counter a specific strategy in the game? Like, there is quite literally a paywall to prevent myself from enduring terrible games that should ideally just be a general perk in the game. At the very, very least. Like I said, I would prefer it to be a very, very weak base kit mechanic in the game, but at the very least, it should be a general perk in the game. But every form of anti-tunneling in the game is paywalled. DS, paywalled. Off the record, paywalled. DS, obviously, tunneled, you get down, you picked up, you stun them. Off the record, you get an endurance state. Even if the killer does not directly come back to hook immediately, if they come back to tunnel you later, you still have endurance up. So if you are not a content creator that buys the content all the time, or somebody who's obsessed with the game that has a lot of money, you are just going to be subject to tunneling all the time. Which is like, it really sucks. It really sucks, and puts people that casually play this game in a really, really bad position. It puts people who play this game casually in a really bad position. And honestly, like I've said in many different videos, we don't pay the bills. We who are super into the game, we don't pay the bills. The casual player base pays the bills. So the fact that they are getting the rough end of the deal here, it's not good for the general health of our game. So I really am ultimately disappointed in the fact that they buffed it back, because it is just the most unintuitive band-aid fix to a larger problem. It just makes me sad. Like I said, I would at least would rather have a general perk that addresses tunneling that's not as strong as the new DS is going to be. And in a perfect or ideal world, like a utopia, we have some very, very weak form of base kit anti-tunnel mechanic, kind of like the anti-cat mechanic. So that's how I feel about it. TLDR, don't. If killers are going to have access to tunneling as a strategy all the time, survivors should have access to anti-tunneling as a strategy all the time. But what do you guys think? I'm sure I have a very, very large killer main audience, so I feel like this video is not going to hit as well as I would have hoped. But that's okay, because I feel like this is better for the health of the game. But obviously, if you disagree with me, you're welcome to talk about it with me and others down in the comments below. But I do upload daily, so I will see you tomorrow. But if I do not, friends, I will see you when I see you. Goodbye.